how we deal with procurement. So, again, thank you for driving all the way in from Coburg. We appreciate that. So with that, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. My name is Michael Clark. I am an executive representing FELFAB Limited for the defense and government sector. FELFAB is a 72-year-old privately owned Canadian business. We're based in Hamilton, and we specialize in providing innovative textile solutions. We pride ourselves on transforming purchased fabrics into engineered solutions to meet specific industry applications. We operate within a variety of industries. We're a multi-year award-winning vendor in the commercial aerospace world. We operate in the rail, the nuclear, industrial, and defense markets. We're also a vendor in the space market. When you look at the Canadarm and you see the white textile wraps with the Canadian flag on the Canadarm, that was made by FELFAB Limited in Hamilton in our Class 100,000 clean room. So it's a very, very interesting story. At FELFAB, we employ 125 individuals, and we fall under the designation of a small, medium-sized enterprise as it's laid out according to ISED. We leverage this distinction using the ITB policy for large government procurements. In other words, the ITB being industrial technological benefits. We work primarily with large defense contractors in this field. I'm going to save you a whole list of programs we've worked on before. In a 2022 report that was released by ISED, it indicated that firms with fewer than 250 employees represent nearly 90% of the companies in the Canadian defense sector. Like FELFAB, these companies do not operate solely in the defense sector. They play a role in a number of different industries as well. Navigating the complexities in large-scale defense programs is a continuous endeavor for us. While we acknowledge the complexity and nature of the defense procurement system, we also recognize and we know firsthand the impact that small, medium-sized companies have in this sector. I've watched some of the recordings from previous sessions, and a lot of the discussions have been about large-scale defense programs, planes, ships, those big things. But we must not overlook the smaller scale initiatives and projects that impact the day-to-day operations of the CAF. Outfitting CAF personnel with necessary kit or products to maintain equipment is crucially important. Our experience in these projects has taught us that speed and efficiency are equally crucial. While these programs that we work on may not boast billion-dollar budgets, their cumulative impact is far from trivial. Today, I would like to emphasize the critical importance of supporting Canadian companies for our defense needs. Choosing Canadian companies means investing in our people, highly skilled jobs, and fostering innovation within our borders. Furthermore, supporting Canadian companies like FELFAB enable us to contribute to important initiatives such as resettling refugees, integrating them into our community, and providing them with meaningful employment. In summary, every dollar that we spend outside of Canada takes from Canada. The world is always changing, and our changes in the procurement world must keep step. COVID taught us a very valuable lesson. The reliance on a non-Canadian-centric supply chain or procurement policy can be risky. Navigating the defense procurement policy is not an easy endeavor, especially for small companies. Simply stated, if there's a requirement for the CAF and there is a suitable Canadian solution, then you should buy it. It's the best thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. How do we make it easier and quicker for small, medium-sized businesses to work within the defense procurement policy? As somebody once said to me, the questions are easy, the answers are difficult. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. And Mr. Kelly, 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much for coming here and being here today. And indeed, we're hoping that maybe perhaps through your testimony we can get some answers about how procurement can be improved. As a small or medium-sized enterprise, what are the challenges in dealing with PSPC?
Sometimes it's not always just dealing with PSPC. When contracts are let and they're tendered, that goes through PSPC. There's a lot of times programs or product are required by D&D that don't necessarily go through that same tendering process. In those cases, when we talk about speed, that's probably one of the issues we run into, and that's the ability to work with individual bases on individual applications. How are they able to
So
get
is it
product?
easier is it your suggestion then that it's easier to deal straight with D&D than it is to go through PSPC?
It's definitely quicker. The tendering process can be lengthy. Some things will drag on for a while. There's extensions and such.
Okay, so for relatively smaller, lower threshold, lower valued contracts, it would be better not to deal with PSPC. Is that what you're saying?
My opinion, yes.
Okay, thank you. The Government Operations Committee studied PSPC and the challenges of small and medium sized enterprises dealing with PSPC. And I recall the testimony. I mean, it was staggering. The barriers to dealing with for procurement across Canada were every witness sort of repeatedly talked about how difficult it was to bid on contracts. And so that leads to fairly uncompetitive contracts because most companies just don't have the expertise and can't be bothered, frankly, to gather that skill to negotiate through PSPC. This study was a little while ago. I'm not sure. Would you agree with some of that characterization? And do you think it's gotten better over the last 3 or 4 years since that study was tabled?
That's an interesting point. There are instances that I can think back to a number of years ago. I can't remember the companies individually that said it's too difficult and it's onerous. If you're a small company to get involved in some of these larger programs and tenders, they just don't have the horsepower sometimes to pull it off. Even with our organization, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of manpower to sometimes work on a tender, pull things together, do what is being asked in the tender process to be able to submit a bid.
Could PSPC, well, could the Government of Canada, whether it's the Department or PSPC, do they need to do a better job of concise and accurate RFPs?
That's a tough question to answer because everyone is different. Some of them are definitely more complex than others. I don't
The
know if
RFPs or the actual solution required?
in some cases, the actual RFP. I don't know if I've actually got a good answer for that because there's some that I've seen that are fairly straightforward and simple, others that are quite complicated and have a lot of moving parts to them. I don't pity some of the folks at PSPC that have to orchestrate these whole things because they are complicated. And it's, as I think somebody else has stated here, I think it might have been me, Simon Page, that when you look at some of these tenders, it's not just one department. It's not just, you've got D&D as the tech authority. You have PSPC as the contracting authority. You have ISED, who are also overseeing part of it. So you've got these three circles that are trying to intertwine and to try and get a balance that everybody is happy with. I don't think you're ever going to see one that goes so smoothly everybody goes, wow, that was perfect. It's going to be very difficult to ever see that happen. But it's...
Okay, but surely we can do better than taking literally decades to fulfill, to figure out and decide what product to buy and fulfill the contract. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think? What do you think delay costs in the operational readiness of the Canadian Forces?
I wouldn't even want to try and guess. I don't know. That's a question.
Do
that
you agree
beyond me.
that delay is a problem and that it takes too long to replace important pieces, whether it is something big, which I know is not what your company does, or something small?
I mean, I hear it from my peers, people that are with the large defense primes that say, yeah, it takes too long. They're complex systems. I mean, when you're talking about something like a ship, that is a very complex system. An aircraft can be very costly and complex.
Okay. What about the smaller things that your company bids on?
The actual tendering process is fairly quick. But again, it's the identification from D&D to say, what is it that we want to be looking for? What is it that we need? And what D&D has done more recently has said, what does industry have to offer? So they will actually interview industry, get industry involved to see what is available in the market today and try and select the best of the best instead of what they've done maybe years and years ago, which is invent something and then go to industry and say, can you build it?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Collins, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Kelly, welcome. It's always great to have a Hamilton perspective, but especially from, as you noted earlier, a very successful, longstanding small to medium-sized business, family-owned business that's done terrific things from an employment perspective in the city of Hamilton. And so I appreciate you providing testimony today. To date, we've largely looked at some of the internal controls related to how the procurement process works between ministries and the steps and layers that it takes for a contract to not just be let, but then awarded. One of the questions that I've asked some other witnesses is when and where should industry be a part of that procurement process through those steps? We've talked about, in some cases, the lack of communication, the need for more transparency.
Right.
Where do you, with your experience with these contracts, where do you see industry? How does industry play a role in terms of providing some advice all through that process?
Mm-hmm. And you see it even today with a lot of programs that D&D and the Tech Authority, they're involving industry right from the get-go. Because the first thing they do is when they look at is there something that we need? So first they identify as their need. The next thing they're doing is they are going to industry. And they're going to industry and saying, we're looking for something like this, what have you got? So industry are being engaged almost right from the beginning. And we've seen it now over the last 10, 15 years when you attend CANSEC, which of course you're probably aware of the large show every year here in Ottawa, that D&D really tell their people, get out there, go to these events, engage with industry, see who's out there, see who does what. So the people that are within D&D are being educated as to where these companies are, what do they do? But they are engaging industry pretty much right from the beginning. They're engaging industry with industry days, so if there's a certain program, and really ever since COVID, these have become more and more common because we can do hybrid meetings now. People are more used to the virtual concept, so they can get a lot of people involved and asking the question, what does industry have? What do you have to offer us? So I think it is working now.
All right. The parliamentary budget officer appeared before a committee and talked about some of the inefficiencies that comes with having multiple ministers and ministries involved in the procurement process. Too many hands on the wheel can make things a little bit difficult for those vendors that are going through that process. Your thoughts in terms of dealing with one or more ministries? Should it be one? Does the current system work now when you're dealing with multiple ministries?
I think when you're getting into programs of that magnitude, those are the ones where we're playing at that sort of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level. So we'll be supporting those prime contractors. So they're probably dealing with that a lot more than we do at the level that we play. So I probably would say I'm not the best one to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. I know you do a lot of business in the United States outside of Canada, and can I ask in terms of their procurement process when you're bidding on government projects in other countries, anything to learn from what they're doing right?
So in Canada, we have Felfab Limited, privately owned, family-owned business. In the United States, we have Felfab Corporation. Now, the CEO is common amongst both, but that is a totally separate entity. Felfab Corporation in the U.S. do very little defense business. We're trying to change that, but it's very different. So I would say that we don't have the same, nowhere near the same level of exposure in the defense market in the U.S.
Okay. It's not surprising, I think, to many of us who've been in government for a while that one of the biggest complaints that comes through the procurement process from vendors who decide to formally complain is the whole issue of bias. Have you experienced that with some of the contracts that you've been on before, and have you filed any formal complaints, and how have they been dealt with, if you have?
No, we've never run into that, or at least to my knowledge.
That's good to
I've been
hear.
with the organization for 7 years. I've never run into it firsthand, so I don't have any recollection of us encountering such a thing or reacting to it.
Okay. Can I ask in terms of, we had a recommendation from another witness who talked about maybe structuring the procurement process a bit different than we do today, especially for our larger contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about removing some of the barriers and hurdles that vendors need to go through when they're going through that process.
Okay.
His suggestion was that while that might prove some benefit to us in terms of speed, and that's I think of the utmost importance for both the government and the vendors who are participating, it may have some impact on transparency in terms of almost bending the rules rather than breaking them, which could create a messy situation, certainly from a political perspective. Our constituents want everything to be open and transparent. We don't want to run into instances where vendors are complaining at the end of the day that there's been some bias. So can I get your reaction to, as we kind of look at the procurement policies that have been developed over decades, probably for the entire length of your operation at Felfab there in Hamilton, what's your opinion in terms of removing some of the requirements that are embedded into the procurement process with the outcome where we may have less transparency with what we put out from a procurement perspective?
And that's
That's a very important question. Unfortunately, Mr. Collins has left you no time to answer it, so if you could work.
Thank you. He'll return the favor.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some reciprocity here. Madame Normandine is next. She will speak to you in French, so I'll just give you a second to get yourself wired up there. Oh, so he did. Okay, good. Okay, please, 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for coming here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer my colleague's question, as it's one I wanted to put to you. That is, are there any excessive restrictions on smaller projects, restrictions that we could eliminate to help PMBs? Are there any barriers that you feel are quite useless that cause problems for you?
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually a good question. I talked about speed, and speed is critical sometimes. Part of what gets delayed is if there's a part of D&D that wants to do a small local purchase order, they have restrictions on how much they're allowed to spend without it then having to go through a more formal process. Sometimes they're not aware of what those levels are. But the fact of the matter is those levels haven't changed in probably close to a decade. And we have seen, as you know, inflation has gone rampant. price of product is through the roof. In the province of Ontario, we've had labor increases since 2016. The basic cost of product is more. So when they come to us and say, we would like to buy this many widgets, they can't buy that many widgets anymore. So they either have to buy less, they're not getting what they want, they're not going to get the right product that they want, or now it has to go back for reapproval. This all takes time. And that's, when you're talking about that small procurement, that's a piece of critical kit that they might need. It might mean something that they're going to the Arctic with, and they need it in 2 months. But this process is going to take 2 months. So I think some of the changes is maybe updating some of the procurement levels that these companies have access to, or the money that they can spend for a single purchase order.
Merci beaucoup. Vous avez parlé en réponse
Thank you. In answering a question, you talked about opportunities to businesses to present their products to defense or during CANSEC, but small businesses have difficulty knowing what the department's needs are. For instance, let's say there's a purchase order and they weren't even aware of it. They say, I could have offered a better product at a better price, but they're not aware of it. So what are the needs and how can we resolve this?
And that's a good question. When I started getting involved in the defense sector, it was very much that sort of question. Where do I start? What do I do? How do I know about these things? Because if you hear something on the radio that says, hey, there's this company in London that just got awarded this huge vehicle contract from the military, I should go visit them. You're probably about 5 years too late. The thing with the defense sector is the sales cycle is extremely long. So you do need to get involved earlier on. There are always, you can just Google, how do you do business with the government of Canada? And you'll find some information there. I was actually giving this some consideration last night. Your MP, if you want to get involved in the defense sector, pick up the phone, call your MP and say, this is who we are, this is what we want to do. They can put you in contact with, in some cases, your RDA, your Regional Development Agency. They will help you tremendously in navigating what is the defense circle, what do I do, where do I go, who can I talk to, what associations can I join, what events can I take part in. It comes down to, doing your homework as far as the industry goes. Where do you play, who do you talk to? And then it's just a matter of time. I remember a number of years ago getting a call from a company from out west, and the gentleman saying, I was told to give you a call because I want to get involved with the defense sector. I attended this meeting and I sent off some information. When am I going to hear about the program? And I said, well, maybe in about 3 years. And his answer was, 3 years? Well, now you're talking to somebody who's used to oil and gas. And he said, I'm not waiting for 3 years. I'm going to go back to doing what I want to do. So there's a level of patience that's needed in the defense sector. Things do not happen quickly. But you need to get involved in navigating, going to the association meetings, the events, meeting the people within the defense sector who get involved with the design work, and understanding from the standpoint of your company, where do you fit in this whole world? Because when you look at different types of systems, putting a piece of textile on a ship is going to be different than that same piece of textile you're going to put in a kit going to the Arctic. There are different types of requirements. So you really need to understand, as with any industry, what does that industry look for? What are the demands on your product? Does your product meet that? And there might be certain areas where you just don't play.
Mais justement, est-ce que la défense devrait être un peu plus...
Defense has to be more transparent so that its needs are better known to small businesses. Would you agree?
I'm just trying to think of the best way to word an answer for that. Should defense procurement be more transparent? Yes. I think if you follow things and you keep up to speed with things, I think for the most part it is transparent. Because if a procurement process is not transparent, we talked to Mr. Chad mentioned about speeding things up for the sake of speed and maybe having less transparency. And that's probably going to come back and bite you at the end, because guaranteed somebody is going to cry foul on the play. And all of a sudden they're going to contest something. And now it's going to get tied up with committees and investigations and everything else. So are you really saving the time at the end of the day? I don't know. That's a comment from me. That's not necessarily industries, but that's the way I would look at it.
Thank you, Ms. Normandine. Ms. Mass, in 6 minutes.
Thank you for appearing today. I just wanted to ask, sort of further into some of the question having already been asked. A lot of times we've heard that, and I think that you touched on it but didn't quite drill into it, that during those processes of discovering what is needed, what D&D wants, the idea versus the reality, and so on, I've been told that industry is very perplexed by D&D changing their mind halfway through. Have you seen that? Have you had experience with that?
I can't say that I've experienced D&D changing their mind.
Or altering plans, asking for a bit more, things like that. Does that impact your company in particular, or no?
I guess it depends on what the impact is or what the change is. If they change the fundamental, let's just take a textile as a good example. If they change the requirement for that textile to say all of a sudden, we want so many hours of UV resistance, we want it to be flexible at minus 50 or something like that, all of a sudden it changes the type of material you use, it's going to change the way you build it, then it could have an impact on your solution or what you're offering. I don't think I've ever seen a situation where they've drastically changed it to the point that, oh no, we can't even build this anymore. So I've not experienced that myself.
So I've been working and have introduced a bill, a private member's bill, C-300, and it was trying to change that procurement system to give greater weight to companies that manufacture within Canada and within that bidding process to have that one up. You spoke yourself in your testimony about making that space for those Canadian companies, ensuring that played a role. So just to reflect on the relationship between that federal procurement, those dollars being spent within Canadian manufacturing, and how important that is. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. So I'll maybe borrow on something and twist it into a little bit of a hypothetical answer. So if we have a product and D&D would like to buy that product from us, but they find out, or through their means, they find out we're the only company that make this great, innovative, we'll call it the widget. So they want to buy that widget from us. But we're the only ones that make it, and we're in Canada. What do we typically do? In some cases, they may open that tender up to everybody to quote on it. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to Hamilton next week, and I need to get a new set of wiper blades. So I go to Canadian Tire, I get my wiper blades, and I put them on. I didn't go and get 3 quotes from 3 different places to buy my wiper blades. I probably paid a fair market price for it, but I got them right away because time was critical. And I guess that's the type of thing when D&D wants something, there's a Canadian manufacturer that can make it. The analysis is there value for money? You're buying a Canadian product, it's made in Canada. Are you going to pay a few pennies more? Possibly. But what's it going to cost you to go through a bidding process and evaluate products from around the world and everything else? Is it still value for money? Sometimes it's easier, it's quicker. You might pay a few pennies more, but you're going to get what you want and quicker. I don't know if that sort of answers the question.
Yeah. In terms of you also talked about those larger businesses versus the smaller SMEs. Do you believe ultimately that Canada could show a great deal of strength by more involvement in the diversity of those smaller SMEs?
I'm not sure what you mean by diversity.
Well, just in that with more involved, and the strength of that Canadian innovation, would that strengthen more projects, in your opinion?
I think so, because success will breed success. So that company that I told you about that said 3 years, I'm not going to get involved with that, and they go elsewhere. But if you could have turned that project around for this company, it could have been a success, and they did it in a year and a half, they might look at it and say, okay, that's worthwhile. And, gee, we've got a team of R&D people that we could throw at some other projects for D&D. There are programs within National Defense, the IDEAS program, where government is looking for solutions. And if companies, Canadian companies are around that maybe have the talent, they don't know about it because they don't play in the defense sector, then you're missing out on maybe some great ideas, some great researchers.
And then, so we heard from, and you, again, you spoke about the industry associations and making better use of them and getting involved, them helping you. Of course, we heard from CADC on their perspectives towards the procurement process. As that direct manufacturer, though, do you differ in terms of your opinions from CADC and what they presented here to this committee, or maybe just talk about your relationship with them specifically?
So Felfab has been a member of CADC for, I think, 20 years. I've been affiliated with the association for about as long. CANSEC at one point in time used to be at the convention center, which is now the Shaw Center. It's very small in comparison. Then they eventually ended up at the EY Center. The show is mammoth. It is huge. You spend 2 days running 1,000,000 miles an hour with your head on fire. It's a tremendous event. I think CADC do a great job. I mean, CANSEC is just one of the events that they host. In the spring, they host the Outlooks, and the Outlooks are tremendous. It's one day for each branch of the service, and that is where you get to meet some of the people and have face-to-face conversations instead of running around 1,000,000 miles an hour with your head on fire.
So they spoke.
Thank you, Ms. Madison.
Oh, well, there you go.
So the recommendation should be that D&D should shop at Canadian Tire? Is that, we'll just write that down.
They're more than just tires.
And they do.
There we are. I think we've got a title for our report. Yes, yeah. Colleagues, we have some other business after this meeting with Mr. Clark. Is there an appetite to shrink the second round a bit? No? Oh, I see. Okay, well, no consensus there?
No, go shrink it.
Oh, we're shrinking, are we? Okay, a minute off, everybody, and we'll do it that way. You have 4 minutes, Ms. Cullen.
This June, we heard stories that our own soldiers in Latvia had to buy their own gear in the middle of their deployment because it was outdated and such poor quality that it prevented them from carrying out their operational mission. Are individual soldiers able to purchase equipment directly from you?
And they called it Gucci gear or something, I think. The products that we'd built in the past for the Clothe the Soldier program, those were to a D&D design. And in a lot of cases, some of the product we built are to a prime contractor's design. We don't own the rights to those designs.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be able to sell it.
Okay,
I was going to say, we do have outerwear that we produce as our own line. Yes, if they wanted to call us and buy some, they
Okay,
absolutely
but
could.
what about individual units? Do any military individual units buy through you directly?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you find dealing directly with a unit or a regiment as opposed to having to go through Public Works and D&D? Is it smoother, more streamlined?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We do a line of Arctic-rated sleeping bags, and we provide them for certain departments of the armed forces that go to the north. They'll call up and say, can I get 10? Sure. Can I get 3? They'll process it on a credit card, and they can buy it that way.
And it's quick?
It's about as quick as calling any
Okay.
e-retailer where you can just say, can I buy one? Yes.
And
Here's a
how
purchase
long
order.
would it take if they had to go through all the machinery of government to do that?
Well, typically what would happen is the government's not going to want to go to tender to buy 10 of something. So they're going to want to go and buy 100 of something. So it's going to, you're going to have to write the statement of requirement from D&D, and then it goes to PSPC, and then they do up a whole tender, and then they issue the tender, and then there's questions and answers. And the next thing you know, 3 months go by before anything's done.
So has the government awarded you any standing offers for certain items so that If a soldier needs this piece of webbing or that, because I'm told they can mix and match on their own according to their own preferences. Is that something that they have tendered for, a standing offer for these pieces?
Not with us, no.
Okay. From your expertise, how many years on average would you consider the quality of the tactical gear that our soldiers use before it needs to be replaced? And this applies
Yeah.
to all gear, not just gear provided by your company.
Yeah, I really don't, I don't know. Because in some cases, there's some kit that's issued to a soldier and it doesn't get used, and it would last for a very long time. Other cases, they get deployed, it gets thrown off a truck, it gets thrown off an airplane, out of a helicopter, and it might not even last a year.
Okay,
So
so
I don't know.
you had mentioned you read a story about the soldiers in Latvia having to find their own equipment. How did your company, or in general also, how did your industry respond to these stories?
I don't think I'm going to be able to speak for industry. I read it and I went, yeah, okay, I could see that happening. That if there's something that they absolutely want to have and they can't get it quickly enough, yes, I could see them going and buying it on their own.
And there's nothing you wouldn't be proactively saying, hey, we've got these available, you want to get these to them? And
Yes, absolutely, I'd love to. But if it's a piece of load carriage that we built for D&D and it's their design or somebody else's IP, we can't help them.
So the can pad or whatever, is that the kind of thing you're referring to, the pattern?
It's not so much the pattern, but let's say, for example, the vest is an integral system to something else. For example, the Integrated Soldier System platform uses a particular vest. The design of that vest is owned by the company that created that system. So could we make it? Yes, but we don't have the authority to build it and sell it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Madame Lambropoulos, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to begin by thanking our witness for being here with us today. Definitely a different perspective, not perspective, but you're bringing a different sector of the economy, I guess, or a different type of business than what we're used to. So you did mention that, you spoke about a lot of the benefits that choosing a Canadian company would have for all Canadians, for society at large, whether it's newcomers to Canada who get to work in these companies or just generally providing jobs to Canadians. Because we're not used to hearing from a small, medium-sized business, I guess I'll ask you this one question. Do you believe that Canadian companies have pretty much all that it takes or all that would be necessary or needed by the CAF? I know that when it comes to bigger companies and when it comes to, larger procurement deals that, require equipment that are going to be used in terms of the military, it may be a little bit more difficult, but in terms of the small, medium-sized businesses, do you think that pretty much you can cover it? And by you, I mean the companies in Canada.
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer because when you look at all of the kit that the CAF buys, there's a lot of product there. You're not talking just ships, everything that goes on the ships. You're talking about everything about the airplane, everything that goes in the airplane, a truck, a vehicle, a tank. I don't know if there's a real easy answer to that question. From the standpoint of, the ITV policy is there because when Canada goes to buy a large system like a ship or an aircraft, no, we don't make certain parts of that system. So they will institute the ITV policy so that a representative amount of business has to be put back into Canada as economic benefit to Canada. That's how you get your direct and indirect offsets. Can answer properly the question about is there the resources in Canada, or for lack of a better term, to meet all the need of the CAF? I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah, I don't think the answer is yes, but I appreciate your response. Definitely, though, your point is whenever they are able to, then they should choose Canadian companies. Another question I have is maybe if you can walk us through one of the better experiences that you've had where it was simple and you dealt with the procurement process in an easy way and there were, no no slowdowns. Can you walk us through what is necessary to make that happen and if you have any good examples?
Okay. I can think of a couple instances this year where somebody is called up from a base or a detachment and said, you make this product, can we get some of that? Yes, how many do you need? I need this many. Okay, great, here's a credit card. They purchase it. We've had another instance where we were contacted and they said, okay, we're looking for a piece of equipment to go on a vehicle. We're looking for it to do this, this, and this. Can you help us? So basically, we helped them. We came up with a little bit of a design and a pattern, and they gave us a purchase order, and we built one for them, or actually we're building one now, and they'll trial it and see how it goes. So sometimes it can be fairly straightforward. Where that one's going to get complicated is now they want to buy a whole bunch. What happens? Because if they want to buy thousands of these, now we're back to this whole thing of how do they buy this now? Because it's over their delegation level. So how do they process a purchase order? How do they use the defense procurement policy so that they can now get the product that they really want to get? And I think that's when you want to talk about defense procurement, that's a good example of now they know what they want. How do they get it?
Thank you, Madame Lambropoulos. A minute and a half, Madame Normandine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to the question about industrial spin-offs. I often hear that the big companies find that it's a complicated process, that things are added as the process goes along, and that the small businesses are saying it's advantageous to us because big businesses want to then deal with us, and it gives us more opportunities. Is that a simplified way of looking at things? Or do you feel that there are some good industrial spin-offs for the small and medium-sized businesses as well?
Yeah. That's an excellent question because at some of these events where they have the large defense prime contractors, they're present, they're at a table, they're ready to meet small companies. Sometimes what I hear from the primes is the small companies come, but they're not prepared. They've not done their homework as to what it is we're going to be looking for and what is it that we could use from these companies. That's basically leveraging the ITB policy. The ITB policy is not, and I've said this to a number of people, it's not a guarantee that you get business. It's not all of a sudden you're right that now a major defense contractor has to buy product from you. It's a ticket to the dance. It's a means that if you wanted to go to a Boeing or you wanted to go to a General Dynamics, these are large, huge corporations. The offset policy gets you in contact with their people who want to find Canadian companies. So it is a means for you to get an introduction to these large defense prime contractors. You still have to show that you build good product. You still have to have certain qualifications, but it's an entry point. So yes, the offset policy does work. I would suggest to any small and medium-sized company, read up on it, understand it. Get involved with government agencies such as the RDAs who can help educate you on how to leverage this to your success.
Thank you, Madame Normandine. Ms. Madsen, minute and a half.
So oftentimes, New Democrats have talked about overall like a larger, long-term Canadian manufacturing strategy to have that bigger picture. Would that fall into play in terms of the defense strategy? Could that be used for both larger and small and medium-sized enterprises for that larger strategy within Canadian manufacturing?
I'm trying to think of a decent answer to the question because when we engage with defense programs, maybe I do it in my own head, I divide it. That one is a super large, it's a large program, it's a ship, it's a plane, it's a tank, it's a vehicle. We're going to be a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. What is it that they're going to be looking for from us as far as product, as far as capability, perhaps also as far as offsets go. If it's a situation where we're selling our capability directly to D&D, that's almost a different process. It's a little bit of a different mind thought because now we're the, for lack of a better term, prime contractor.
By switching it around, though, having that longer term, would that provide companies like yours to be able to plan better?
You say longer term.
Like a 30-year, a 50-year strategy. Would that help or not?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
You know, because smaller businesses, now we're probably a little bit different because we have been around for so many years, but typically your smaller, medium-sized businesses, they're looking 5-6 years out. So.
Thank you. Ms. Matt, am I to conclude that there are no further questions? With that, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Clark, for your immensely practical advice and the utility of that advice, given that we sometimes get lost in the weeds of these major procurements, and this is actually kind of where things are at for the daily experience of procurement in D&D. So thank you for coming up from Coburg. Thank you for your advice, and thank you for your experience. So with that, I'm going to suspend, and we will motion by Mr. Bazan, all of which you currently have. And then subsequently, Ms. Lalonde moved an amendment to that motion. Mr. Bazan then challenged it for being in scope. I am referring to page 541. You mean I'm not going to get a chance to make this? Okay. Ms. Lalonde.
Mr. Chair, if I have the approval of a UC, I would like to withdraw my amendment.
Is that, you say unanimous consent to withdraw
Unanimous
her amendment?
consent.
Everybody's agreed to that? Well, gee, I didn't. Why did I get all this research done? Eh? Gee. Okay, Mr. Bazan.
So there has been some discussions, I believe, between parties, and I will withdraw my motion in favor of a motion being proposed by Ms. Matheson, which I think is a good compromise.
Can you read your motion into the record? And are there copies? I have one in front of me. I have one.
I've got one.
I don't have one in front of me. Thanks.
I would like a copy. I just think there's so many here. I have like 5 motions.
Organize the chaos. Everyone's got copies now. Before I call on Ms. Matheson, just review this. Mr. Bazan made a motion. The Liberals proposed an amendment. By unanimous consent, the Liberals withdrew their amendment. Mr. Bazan then withdrew his amendment. I don't know whether you needed unanimous consent or not, but it's off.
He withdrew the motion.
Yeah. And we are now on Ms. Matheson's.
It's a motion.
It's a motion. Yes. So with that, Ms. Matheson, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Couldn't you read it into the record?
I will do both. As New Democrats always seem to be providing compromise and good governance, I'm happy to bring this forward.
Oh, now we're really losing the crowd.
That pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee undertake a study on the contracting of consulting services and other professional services within the Canadian Armed Forces, including the impact of the reductions announced in Budget 2023. That the committee hold a minimum of 2 meetings for this study. That the committee invite the Minister of National Defence, the President of the Treasury Board, the Commander of the Canadian Forces Real Property Operations Group, the Deputy Minister of National Defence, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Finance, the Assistant Deputy Minister Infrastructure and Environment, and the Assistant Deputy Minister Review Services.
Do you wish to speak to it other than that?
Well, I believe that ultimately this is a compromise between what both the Conservatives and the Liberals were trying to accomplish. I think that my amendment or my motion here gives further teeth to the study to ensure that we have the people in the room to talk about those contracting services that are significantly a problem, that need to be looked at, that deal with the budget reductions that have been put forward, and I think that we could have some really good conversations with those who are actually involved with that process that we're trying to get into.
Any other debate? Those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that passes. Mr. Fillmore, sorry. I saw Mr. Fillmore before I saw you, unless you have another motion.
Another motion, yes.
Okay, but I saw Mr. Fillmore before I saw you. So, Mr. Fillmore.
I know it's too late now, but that's what we have. Sorry. Thank you, and I thank members for the indulgence of letting me do this again. Mr. Chair, I think everyone has a copy of the motion that I've had circulated regarding a study of space and the role in national defense. I believe a study on the space industry of space defense is pertinent to many of the issues that our committee has within its purview and mandate right now, specifically in particular around national security and sovereignty and the international dynamics of defense. And I was reflecting back to a comment made at the Halifax International Security Forum, or HISAF, last year, where one of the panelists very astutely pointed out, I thought, that the future of security was, in fact, space, was in space. And that, for instance, new capabilities in space represent the next frontier in how we protect ourselves from new and emerging threats. And he said at that time that satellites are the future. So it's my hope that this study will illuminate the committee and therefore government and therefore Canadians on what the major issues are in space defense and how we're prepared to deal with them. For instance, how we protect our satellites from space debris or anti-satellite weapons and cyber attacks, or how we use those satellites for climate monitoring activities at a time when climate monitoring is increasingly important to our security here on Earth. I also hope this study will give us and Canadians a better understanding of how an increased focus on space defense will inform our international partnerships, including through NORAD. I'd also hope that we would learn through this study about Canada's space defense policies, our space capabilities and programs, including those at our armed forces and the 3 Canada Space Division. And then I hope the committee will also hear from industry, because this is another opportunity for Canada to be a leader in an emerging industry that can create good jobs for tomorrow with the right kind of support from this committee. The motion then is that, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee undertake a study on space defense that includes but is not limited to the current state of Canadian space defense capabilities and programs, international agreements and partnerships related to space defense, including continental defense and space diplomacy, and the impact of advancements in space on Canada's sovereignty and national security. That the committee hold a minimum of 4 meetings, and that the committee invite representatives of the Department of National Defence, the Canadian Armed Forces, the 3 Canadian Space Division, Canadian NORAD region, the Canadian Space Agency, Space Canada, and the private and academic sectors. That the committee report its recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a detailed response to the report. Thank you.
Debate? James.
Mr. Chair, so I would just say that it is an area of interest. It's, to me, not a high priority, looking at the existential threats that are before us, and also how new Canadian Armed Forces are in space so far with the Space Command, and actually, my understanding is only have one defense satellite up as it sits today. I would think that we could do this in less than 4 meetings. Most of the witnesses named there are the Department of National Defense agencies, and probably could do them in one panel. I would also suggest that Canadian Space Agency would be a panel. That's 1 hour, and Space Canada and the private sector would appear for an hour, and then your academics and other interested parties in your final panel. So I would suggest the following amendment. First is the correction in the spelling of defense, so we put it into English, Canadian English, and that the committee hold a minimum of 2 meetings.
Okay.
And just to that amendment, we just passed a motion talking about a bill, looking at the budgetary cuts and the reductions in budget 2023, which is, $1 billion. We're looking at the contracting services of that currently are done by Canadian Armed Forces. You look at the those impacts of both those issues as it surrounds the recruitment and retention crisis that we have in the Canadian Armed Forces and the existential threats that Canada faces. That, to me, and we only assigned 2 meetings to that study, and to me that is much more relevant and important. And for that reason, I would say if you're measuring, comparing apples to apples, motions to motions, 2 meetings would suffice.
Okay, the conversation is on the amendment. Mr. Fillmore, and then I take Norman Dean, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bazan acknowledged the existential threats that Canada is facing, and the solution to many or most of those is going to have an impact on exactly what this study is pertaining to. In the development of the motion, I did pretty extensive outreach to the stakeholders that I've listed in the motion. There is a long list of people who are very eager to have a say on this and to get what they have to say out there in the world, so that we can better support the work that we're doing in space and the DND and the 3 Canada Space Division as well. To compress that to 2 meetings, this isn't a perfunctory study. This is a substantial study. I actually brought it back from what I thought was going to be 6 meetings to 4. This is an extremely meaty topic, and I believe, Mr. Bazan, you'll be at Halifax International Security Forum in a couple of weeks, and we will be hearing about space probably every single day, multiple times a day. I can hardly imagine there is a more important topic for us to be taking timely and substantive study of.
Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to deal with the substance. I know we're dealing with the amendment, but this would be an interesting study. But I think that we've done specific studies on the question of aerospace and the threats to Canada, where we dealt with the whole issue of the aerospace sector. We're talking about a minimum of 2 meetings. I find it a bit strange that we're only I have the impression that we should have a minimum of 4. 3 I'd be comfortable with, but I think a minimum of 4. And I think we're going to have to cut into some of the work that we've already wanted to.
Yeah, I don't support the amendment to move it to 2. I think it's much more important than some of the things that we've done on single motions. This motion hadn't occurred to me, but when I think about, I remember Ms. Gallant and I were at the, I think it was the Pentagon, and we were in the gift shop and the U.S. Space Force, and I thought, wow, that's truly the next frontier. I think this is the future of defense, and I think 4 meetings actually makes a lot of sense. So I support the original motion.
Notwithstanding Mr. Fisher's shopping experience at the Pentagon, we have on many occasions we go with a minimum number, and we sometimes find that the subject matter and the availability of witnesses and the quality of the testimony we're getting demands or causes interest in the committee to have additional meetings. I am not opposed to 4 meetings. I am opposed to a minimum of 4 meetings. We've done this before where we plan on having a number of meetings and find we can't get the witnesses that we need and or that there are other priorities. And I think it would be more flexible on the committee's part with competing priorities to have a minimum of 2. That doesn't preclude us from having 4. It doesn't preclude us from having 6. But if we're going to set a minimum that we're compelled to have under a motion, it ought to be a lower number, and I would say 2 as a minimum, and we'll see where the study takes us.
Any other conversations on the amendment? Andy?
Thanks. Of course, the worry then is that committee shenanigans take over, and we get we truncate a study that's really taken off after 2 meetings, and that's untenable. So I guess, Mr. Chair, why don't we? I wonder if I could invite my colleagues across the way to friendly amendment to their amendment to make it a minimum of 3, and then I think we could rely on the good faith of members if more meetings are required, as Mr. Kelly has suggested, that we could do that. Merci.
Collegial harmony breaking out here. Okay.
I'm not sure about
Okay. That maybe yes. Cheryl?
Would we be able to travel to U.S. Space Command to get the real story on what's going on, because we won't find out anything from our own people?
Or you can put that in, I suppose, in the requests for travel. Marie-France?
Actually, I think here in Ottawa, you will be very surprised to know that there's a very, very important organization that I'm sure would be of a value to visit, which is a walking distance. So I think we possibly would add this little thing, hopefully.
Okay. Before we go sideways here with all this harmony stuff, can I assume that the motion as framed by Mr. Fillmore at 3 is acceptable? It's acceptable. Minimum 3. Minimum 3. Okay. Those in favor? Opposed? Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, have a motion. I had presented notice a while ago. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to it. And it's ultimately just in response to a number of the stories, of course, that we've heard coming forward from people within the military or the department talking out about the abuse that they have suffered, whether that's military sexual trauma or other forms of abuse, and then, of course, facing harsh repercussions in their careers. Survivors have been forced to ATIP themselves in order to get the necessary documents for legal claims, and they've come to quite a lot of non-responses or very, very long wait times on those inquiries. So I think it's important that when we're talking about that public trust and that transparency that's required for a lot of what's going on, that we study the following. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study into transparency of the Department of National Defense, and Canadian Armed Forces. That includes, but is not limited to, the Access to Information and Privacy System, the independence of the Office of the Department of National Defense and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman, the declassification system for historic documents, whistleblower protections, the independence of the grievance process, and information management systems. That the committee invite the Canadian Armed Forces Chief of Defense Staff, the Corporate Secretary at the Department of National Defense, the Minister of National Defense, the Information Commissioner, the National Defense and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman, the Chairperson of the Military Grievance and External Review Committee, Veterans and Veteran Advocates.
Great. Ms. Lalonde?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, to recognize me. I'm generally very comfortable with the motion. I was wondering, in the spirit of collaboration, if, as we amended a few other motions, if my colleague, unless I misunderstood, would be comfortable to say that instead of hold a minimum of 4 meetings, a minimum of 3 meetings. If she would be comfortable, that's a proposed first amendment, Mr. Chair.
Unless there's amendment on the floor, any debate on the amendment? Ms. Matheson?
So I would prefer 4, and I think it's mainly the reasoning behind it is that, I mean, there are a lot of officials, but specifically with some of the folks coming forward, veterans advocates, those who have been through this, I don't want giant panels. I would like there to be space given. I don't want them to feel like it's just a lineup, and I would like the capacity and the time to hear them in the way that they need to be heard.
Point of order, if I may. The copy that I was handed doesn't actually have the number of, is that the only, just for the record, was that the only difference in what Ms. Matheson read from
I don't think she put in a number, and you were proposing. Yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
Because we're so generous.
So,
right. So I was speaking to her amendment, asking for 3, and I suggested 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at this point, that is not a friendly amendment, shall we say? The only other question I had was, what part of this is within Veterans Affairs, and what part of this is in Department of Defense?
So it's not Veterans Affairs, but it is those who have gone through the system, dealing with, who are now out, who have now dealt with their cases, and therefore they are considered veterans.
James?
So I'll just say this, that even though it would involve veterans, it would be veterans that are A-tipping their own files from the Department of National Defense and Canadian Armed Forces. And that the Information Commissioner has been quite critical of D&D for being extremely slow in getting information out through ATEP requests for the public at large. And that includes the media and parliamentarians, as well as veterans and others. So my only question here is, where in the motion are we adding in a minimum of 3 meetings? Where's the functionality here within the motion?
At the end, is that where you're putting it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that, and it's up to the wonderful people who have more experience than this, but my recommendation would be that after an information management dot, that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings on the topic. And then there's the other paragraph that the committee invite, and I will have another amendment at that point.
Okay, so there's an amendment on the floor, Do people wish to speak to the amendment? Those in favor of the amendment as proposed by Ms. Lalonde?
It's a minimum.
Maximum 200.
Okay, so
Maximum 200.
Like the procurement stuff.
yeah. So we now have an amended motion on the floor. Then you wish to make another amendment? Ms. Lalonde.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope that it'll be as quick and that consideration for our committee member. So as we go to the second paragraph, it says that the committee invite the Canadian Armed Force Chief of Defense Staff. I would like to strike that person and add instead the Deputy Minister of National Defense, which is ultimately the person responsible for the request of the motion and the notion.
Putting in the deputy
No.
minister.
DM in.
Yeah.
Ms. Madsen.
So I had put the Chief of Defense Staff in as the most senior officer, and I believe that he could speak to the repercussions against survivors speaking out. He is the final voice on the grievance process, as far as I understand, and we've done that research, so that's why he is in there. So I wouldn't agree to that.
Any other conversation on the amendment of taking the CDS out and putting the DM in? Those in favor? Those opposed? That means Ms. Gallant too? The amendment fails.
Yeah, it's 5-5. It's 5, yeah, it's 5.
No, hang on. Did you vote? You didn't vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So you get to decide.
Oh, for goodness sakes. Oh. I haven't really thought about this. So I would propose that the amendment pass then. So we now have that we replace the CDS with the deputy minister. So that would be my sense of it. So I will cast my vote in favor of the amendment. So we now have a motion as amended. Any further debate? Mr. James.
Point of information, we got an email just last week from someone over at the Department of National Defense on ATIPs that I've done in the past, and they're looking for clarification on an ATIP I did in 2018. And they're also looking for information on 4 ATIPs I did back in 2019. Like, I think there's a law that they're supposed to, actually fill these, respond within a few months, not a few years. So, just that this is a timely study.
I'm sure you'll have a great time bringing up that information. So we now have a motion as amended. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay. You're opposed and in favor?
I'm in favor.
You're in favor. I got that. Yeah. Okay. Now, do you have anything else? Yes. Oh, okay.
So while we're doing with committee business, I'd like to move a motion that the committee report to the House of Commons that A, the current state of morale of the Canadian Armed Forces at an unprecedented low. B, lapses in defense spending and budget cuts have left our soldiers understaffed, under-equipped, and without a sufficient supply of affordable housing. C, military families and Canadian Armed Forces members have resorted to using food banks and asking for donations to help them deal with the high cost of living. Therefore, the committee recognized the morale crisis as is the result of a lack of political will and investment, leaving members feeling more undervalued and underappreciated than at any point in recent history, and recommend urgent action by the Canadian government. So, as everybody looks at the motion, may I speak to it, Mr. Chair?
Sorry.
May I speak to it?
Yeah.
So, we continue to hear stories of our soldiers and military families are dealing with major concerns. Their morale is continuing to decline for all sorts of reasons, from everything from feeling disrespected. They often feel that they're not valued by the government or by the leadership within the forces. They believe that the defense spending cuts and the budget lapses that have taken place have significantly undermined their ability to have the equipment that they need to do the job that the government asks of them. They are very concerned about the lack of affordable housing. We are hearing more and more that Canadian members of the armed forces, when they're forced to, when they have to relocate as part of the rotation from one base to the other, I just had an email come in from a family who were stationed in Manitoba at Shiloh, husband and wife, both well employed within the Canadian Armed Forces, and sold their house, transferred to Halifax, and can't afford to buy a home there and living in a tent. They both are, combined income of over $200,000 a year, and they are trying to buy a home. They have the revenue from the house they sold in Manitoba, and even they're bidding on homes at the above asking price. They're still falling short on every time they've tried to buy a home, and they can't find a decent house or a condo or apartment to live in. And there is a lack, of course, a supply of housing on bases. So, and we've heard from defense officials here, including the CDS, that the Canadian Armed Forces is currently short over 6,000 homes. We know that the issue of affordability, inflation has impacted upon our members in the forces more so than anyone else. And when they're forced to live in high cost areas, they are at a greater disadvantage than many others. So they have resorted to going to food banks, of asking for donations to help offset the high costs of living, the cost of the GST on home heating, except, of course, if they're now in Halifax or over at Gagetown, they're taken care of by the government. But if they're anywhere else in Canada, they're not. So that type of divisive policies coming from the Liberal government and Prime Minister Trudeau is not helping. So I think it's important that we report this to the House. I think it's important that we show to our Canadian Armed Forces that we are listening to them, that we're aware of all the problems that they're having. We know that we're short 16,000 troops. Just yesterday, Minister Blair, during question period in the Senate, again said that we are in a retention crisis, that attrition continues to exceed 4,000 to 5,000 a year over what they can recruit. And we heard from the Chief of Defence Staff that in addition to being 16,000 troops short, we are short 10,000 members who are currently undertrained and undeployable, which puts, again, more workload on the current Canadian Armed Forces members who are having to deploy to places like Latvia and England, Kuwait and elsewhere, and are expected to do more frequent rotations, whether it's on ships, in military missions, or within the Air Force. So this is something that we have to tackle, and it's time that the government took this seriously, and I think that's a reason why we need to get this reported back to the House.
Kelly, Kramp-Nyman, Lalonde, Normandin. Matheson.
I support the motion, and I think it's important that this committee report it back to the House and report these findings. We are in a crisis. We are in a time of global uncertainty. We know this well. We know from the testimony that we've heard at this committee on threat analysis and on the health study, which we are still just wrapping up. But we heard the testimony there. We heard all of the factors that are driving our men and women out of the forces, things like the inability for members to get a family doctor, things like their inability to have access to housing. All of these things deeply affect the morale. We've had damning testimony from the military, the defense ombudsman, who spoke about this at committee, and this needs to be reported to the House. We need to show and demonstrate to Canadians that this committee understands the crisis that we're in with our forces, and that the need is urgent, and we have not seen any sense of urgency from the government. We've seen a cut to the budget at the time that our international allies are shaming Canada for its inability to step up and fully fulfill its obligations under the alliances to which we belong, NATO. We are to get our defense spending to 2% of GDP, and yet the government is cutting the department's budget. So this is urgent. It needs to be done and needs to be reported to the House.
Ms. Cramp-Nyman.
Thank you, and I certainly support the motion as well. There's no doubt, let's get the facts on the table. CAF presently is 16,000 personnel short. The personnel gap is expected to grow in the coming months. CAF continues to face an existential threat in the form of a combined recruiting and retention crisis. Morale of our troops have been completely eroded. After 8 years, personnel are leaving the ranks for a lot of different reasons, everything from affordable housing, support for families, lack of equipment, culture in general, lack of funding. In general, lack of political will to support our military. From my eyes, if we need to be war ready in an ever-growing geopolitical complex environment, this Liberal NDP government needs to step up, show respect, and fully commit to our troops. So I certainly acknowledge and thank my colleague for putting this motion forward.
Madame Lalonde.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listen, I've read this alleged motion. I find it unfortunate to see that we're taking a very partisan tact. I see that I think we all agree that our troops are important. I would also like to remind my colleagues opposite that when you look at the military spending, less than 1% of GDP. That's what they said. So I think that we want to undertake some studies here. We have an agenda that is very heavy. And I think for Canadians, when we talk about various important issues, we talk about childcare costs, we talk about a national program that will help people. We're going to undertake studies here to ensure that things advance. We talk about space and national defense. That is of a great deal of interest to me. I'd like to know more about this and how can the committee assist the government as it goes ahead. I think there's a perspective here. My colleague is trying to get his point across, but I'm unclear. We said that we want to ensure that our committee moves things forward. We talk about various shortcomings. I was in the Yukon recently, and they talked about $38.6 billion of investment that's being made in NORAD over the next few years. They talk about the F-35s. We're going ahead with that. But I'm not denigrating the fact that our soldiers are facing problems. Yes, we have to help them. We have to listen to them. That's what we do here in this committee, this National Defense Committee. So I'm wondering, with respect to this motion, I'm wondering about the importance of raising this issue now. I'm just trying to understand the added value. We're going to have motions here. We're going to have discussions. We're going to hear witnesses. We're going to write reports to guide the government. But I need to find, as I was saying, I'm trying to look at the soundness of this, and I look at the different points that he wants to cover. These are all issues that we can study here in committee. I don't feel ready to support this motion out of principle, I think, because we on our side have been trying to deal with these issues within our committee.
I really feel strong and quite passionate about this because as a member of parliament for Orléans, I have the great pleasure of serving a lot of military and representing them. And I know that there's challenges, and we are, I think as a government, we committed in addressing. And here in committee, actually, there's aspect of this motion that Mr. Bizan is bringing that we are actually want to undertake. So I'm just curious to know, does that mean he's not willing to do those studies here in committee and just do them in the House? Like, I see a plus value, Mr. Chair, in having them here actually within this environment where we can hear firsthand from not only our military, from the government perspective, senior officials, and also from individuals who are impacted. But I also want to share that there's been numerous aspect where I think budget has been increasing on the operation. You know, we were just talking about F-35. We're talking about NORAD, $38.6 billion to modernize. And I would also like to reiterate, and I think it's important, our commitment, and I say our commitment, and I hope all parliamentarians will feel the same, of Ukraine and the importance of supporting, Canada supporting Ukraine in their war against this illegal invasion by Russia. So I just don't see how, at this particular point, I could see the value of saying yay, although there's merits in some aspect, and actually we're going to be studying those things. So I'm quite surprised that my honorable colleague wants to do this again when we just talk about space defense. We talked about, another motion that we just brought on the floor. I think this committee can do extremely good work in addressing some of these concerns through this motion, and the best place to do so, it's actually here in our committee. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask that you adjourn debate.
Oh, okay. Those dilatory motion. Those in favor? Those opposed? We continue the debate. Just for a point of clarification, there will be no witnesses called on this motion. This is straight motion into the House. Yeah. Madame Normandine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm comfortable with some parts of this motion, not with others. We've always tried to strike a good consensus here in committee, and one of our strengths is that we listen to other people's perspectives. I'd like to be able to see the same thing with this motion, with the issue of the 2% of the GDP, which is not, that undermines our capacity in our allies' eyes. I think we all agree on that, but I'm not. What I don't like about the motion is that there are some things that we've not heard any testimony about. For instance, the food banks, unless I'm told otherwise, including this in the motion. This is something we've never discussed in committee. Other things have been dealt with in committee, such as the morale of the CAF, and we know that's at an unprecedented low. We know we've heard testimony about retention problems. I think that we have to remember the urgency of taking action, and I see other things in military spending and budgetary cutbacks. The forces are under-equipped. The motion deals with that. I think we could work with that so that the committee recognizes the moral crisis as a result of a lack of political will and investment, There are other causes that we need to take into account. I'd like to work on this so that we achieve a consensus, and I think the committee has to kind of alert the House of these problems. I would like us to be more consensual, and with a little bit of discussion amongst colleagues, I'm confident that we'll get to this point. There are certain valid points in the motion. We could come up with something that's not partisan. There's merit in going directly to the House. I understand that. So, in its current form, I think that we need to work on this motion before I'd be comfortable voting in favor of it.
I would agree with Ms. Normandin. There are parts that I do agree with, and I don't think that we just outright ignore that. I have concerns in terms of wording such as underappreciated, undervalued, then at any point in recent history. I think that's a bit hyperbolic, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm sure that there are many other crises. I am concerned. We have had a very good working relationship. We have gone into good studies where I have learned a great deal about what's going on the ground and how we can be supportive of people within the military, within the Canadian Armed Forces. We did have a very fulsome study of the retention recruitment crisis. We are going to go into a good study that I support in terms of studying housing for our Canadian Armed Forces. So I would want to get to that. And I certainly think that's certainly a part of what's named here. I would love to get into that study. One thing that is missing here, of course, is when we talk about morale, we're not talking at all about the sexual misconduct.
I apologize for interrupting this vigorous debate, but it's 5:30, meeting adjourned. I can do.